Welcome to our course, Literacy Linguistics. I am Dr. Hanan Halabi from the International Arabic Academy. So today we're going to talk about literacy linguistics. Our table of content is going to be the following. We're going to start with an introduction, then linguistic and literacy development. Then we're going to talk about the importance of language and literacy development. Then we're going to talk about the importance of linguistic literacy. What is a linguistic knowledge, linguistic process of reading, linguistic literacy examples. We're going to discuss relationship between language and literacy, helping children excel in literacy, language and literacy in early childhood education, language, linguistics, and literacy and the difference between them. In the second part of this course, we're going to talk about the origin of writing. We're going to talk about spreading of writing and literacy and the alphabetic literacy. As an introduction, we need to know that linguistic literacy is the ability to read and write in any particular language. So we're talking about different language. It is a form of literacy that is specific to a particular language of group of languages. So basically, we're talking about the literacy of a certain language or a group of languages, actually. So linguistic literacy is not the same as general literacy, which is when we talk about general literacy, we're talking about the ability to read and write in any language. But linguistic literacy is not the same. So general literacy in any language means reading and writing. As for linguistic literacy, it is more important for many different reasons. First of all, when we're talking, for sure, we're going to introduce what is linguistic literacy. But first of all, let us talk about its importance. First of all, it can be used to communicate with others who speak the same language or to learn about other cultures. So using linguistic literacy can teach us more about different cultures. It can also be used to preserve one's own culture and identity. It keeps your culture safe. It keeps the heritage of your culture, your traditional identity. And there are many actually different ways to become linguistically literate. One of these ways is to learn a language in a traditional school setting. So basically you go to school, you start learning a certain language. This is the traditional way to learn linguistic literacy. Another way is to learn a language through immersion. So you live in a community where this language is spoken, you start communicating with the people around you, and then you start learning this language by imitating, by communication, by interacting with others, those who are around you. So linguistic literacy is an important skill for anyone who wants to communicate effectively in a globalized world. The study of language structure and evolution is the most systematic way to comprehend the structure and evolution of a human language. So the most significant difficulty in understanding languages is the knowledge of their mechanics. So mainly, this is the main difference between linguistic literacy and general literacy. When we're talking about general literacy, it is the ability to read and write. But when we're talking about linguistic literacy, we're talking about the mechanics of any language. So we all know that all languages have structure, and reading language structure is necessary to comprehend it. So we cannot really understand this language until we know more about its structure, until we know more about its mechanics, until we try to use it and try to use all the rules that are related to this language. It is certainly true that language development and literacy are very important aspects of a child's overall development. So any child's ability to communicate and expressing feelings, these are two things that are supported. So your child will also benefit from the interaction as well as it will help them develop and maintain relationships. So when you use literacy, linguistic literacy, you are asking them to communicate, and you start maintaining good relationships with them. After this introduction, we move to what we call linguistic and literacy development. So how do we develop that kind of literacy? So linguistic and literacy development is the process by which children learn to use language in order to read and write. So this starts with infancy, when they are very young, when children start to learn the sounds of their native language. So when we talk about native language, we talk about the mother tongue language, and continues through childhood and adolescence as they learn to use language for communication, to read and write. So literacy is the process of gradually developing a child's ability to read, which starts basically at the age of 7. So it doesn't start before that. They know how to read very few words and very short words. So when a child learns to read, he or she is said to have an intellectual understanding of print and can recognize words and phrases with simple reading skills like sounding out words. So they start sounding out words, they start developing phonemic awareness, they start developing their understanding of phonics, how to relate sounds to letters, and then this is when they start understanding the print or the words, and they start relating spoken language with written language. So the development of alphabetic fluency in children is marked by the ability to read and write with minimal error. So we read and write, but we try our best not to make mistakes. So being able to read and write all of the alphabet's letters without hesitation or mistakes is essential for fluent alphabet reading and writing. Here we talk about the second stage of literacy development. So we're talking about when a child begins to learn how to read and spell words correctly. So at this stage, they start learning how to spell words, how to read words correctly. So learning how to read and spell words in a consistent and organized manner is a component of learning how to read and spell. So they start actually at the intermediate stage of literacy development. A child gains skills in reading and comprehension of longer texts. So here they start reading longer texts. Reading ability is also measured by the ability to read and comprehend short texts as well as texts that are well organized. During the fourth stage of literacy development, children are able to read and comprehend complex texts more effectively. So here, their ability to read longer texts, more complicated texts, it is improving, it is enhancing. So reading with complex structures and well-organized texts is necessary for a child to advance in advanced reading. What is the importance of language and literacy development? So this process is highly important. When a child has a solid foundation in oral language development in the early years before starting school, actually he or she, or we mean the child, has a better chance of success in reading and writing later in life. So they go to school, they have the ability, or they feel it is easy for them to read and write. Children actually with strong language and literacy skills are more likely to succeed at learning to read on their own. So literacy, linguistic literacy and its importance, here we're going to talk about its importance and why is it important. So when we're talking about linguistic literacy, which means the ability to effectively and productively use language in both formal and informal settings, is referred to as it. So we're talking here about using language to communicate, whether we're talking about the formal or informal way of communication. It includes the knowledge. It includes the knowledge and skills required to communicate effectively, such as the ability to understand and use complex language, expressing oneself clearly and concisely, and engaging in effective verbal and non-verbal communication. In general, language skills are important for all people, but they are especially important for those who are overlooked or face social barriers to participation. For example, immigrants and refugees, deaf people and hearing people, members of racial or ethnic minorities, and those living in poverty are all at a disadvantage if they do not have a high level of linguistic literacy. So they feel that they are below the people that they live with and that something is missing them. That's why they should be linguistically competent. This is why they should keep up with the original native speakers who live in the same country. So linguistic literacy can be improved through education and training, but in this case, it also requires exposure to language and a thorough understanding of how language is used in various contexts. So people who have mastered a single language are typically more likely to learn a second one. Usually we start with the first language and then we move to a second one, then to a third one. So people who are well equipped with one language, they have the tendency to improve and learn a new language. Individuals and communities who want to fully participate in society also must be able to speak a language. That's why we should go into learning the literacy linguistics of a certain language if those people want to communicate with the people around them. This is a fundamental principle that must be followed in all areas of life in order for effective communication to occur. Now we're going to talk about the components of language development. So the process of learning these components is gradual. Usually we do not learn things as a one shot. We do not learn things that fast. So things have to go gradual, step by step. So some children progress faster than others. That's why we should teach the components gradually, although all children reach the same level of language development at a certain point, but the speed that they achieve it varies greatly from one child to another. So we all know that we have different needs and that children learn in different paces. That's why every child learns in a different way. Every child learns in a certain pace. So here we have to talk a little bit about the study. If we're talking about language development, we have to talk also about phonology. So the study of phonology is concerned with the study of sounds and how they are used in language. This is a main part in linguistics. So phonology is defined as the study of sounds made by speakers and how these sounds are coupled. While the study of the structure of word and the relationships is known as morphology. So children learn about morphology by first understanding how words are formed and then writing their own words. Another way to help us learn language is by using a synonym. A synonym actually is an acronym that stands for the rules that govern how words are put together and how they are used. So students and people start predicting of which words can come along and they start to understand the meaning of the spoken words by using different synonyms. So children learn about syntax when they study how words are used in sentences and when they copy sentences. So also here, when we're talking about language, we talk about semantics. So when we say semantics, this is the study of meaning through the lines of language. So here we focus on the language through the semantics or the meanings of words. So it is for children to understand the meanings of words and to create their own meaning through semantics, and this is very important. So the study of how language is used in the real world, or what we call pragmatics, which is a branch of philosophy. So now we use language of real world because it should be something taken from real life experiences, and this is very important. If you want people to understand your language, These are spoken words that are practiced in daily life. We observe also how language is used in everyday life. Children can gain a better understanding of pragmatics. So when we're talking about pragmatics, we're talking about how we are investing in using language in our life. And this theory goes for John Dewey. Now we come to talk about linguistic knowledge. So what is a linguistic knowledge? So linguistic knowledge is the ability to identify and use the features of language. When we're talking about features of language, we're talking about phonetic, grammatical, and semantic properties. So this knowledge is acquired through exposure to language and is used in the production of understanding of speech. So we're talking about all the features combined together in order for people to understand someone's speech. So linguistic knowledge is essential for communication and is used in all aspects of language processing, from word recognition and production to sentence comprehension and production. A linguistic tool can be useful in the development and implementation of communication strategies. So a strong foundation in linguistics provides a solid understanding of how words work and how they are used in everyday life. So language can also help us better understand how people from various cultures communicate. So linguistics has a wide range of practical applications. The study can help us understand how people communicate as well as help us learn more about different cultures. So linguistic, as we said before, linguistic literacy is very important. The study actually of language structure and evolution is the most systematic way to comprehend the structure and evolution of a human language. The most significant difficulty in understanding languages is the language of their mechanics. So it is not easy to understand the mechanics of a certain language. So all languages have structure, and reading language structure is necessary to comprehend it. So in order for us to understand certain language, we need to understand the literacy of that language. Here we come to talk about linguistic process of reading. At its most basic, reading entails recognizing written symbols. So when we're talking about written symbols, we're talking about letters. So grouping the letters together and letter combination with sounds. So here we are combining between what we call the phoneme and the grapheme, and establishing rules for putting together words based on what sounds are associated with the letters. So the decoding process, as also known as phonics, is used as our association. Some of the examples used for linguistic literacy are including the ability to read and write in language, as well as the ability to understand and use oral language. So linguistic literacy also encompasses the ability to understand and use nonverbal communication, such as body language and gestures. Now we come to talk about the relationship between language and literacy. It is critical actually for students to become literate in order to succeed in school and in life. So the first step toward becoming literate is to develop early speech and language skills. So at an early age, from the moment children are born, their caregivers or parents start providing them with input and feedback that assist them in building their understanding and the use of language. They start correcting their mistakes when they are talking. They start giving them the right pronunciation of words in order to teach them more about their native language. Here we come to talk about the relationship between language and literacy. So the oral language is also known as the bedrock of learning for reading and writing. So it starts all with oral fluency language. oral language, that means listening and speaking. So students' spoken language skills are important because it determines their reading comprehension, if they are understanding what they are reading, because when they read, they understand and they reflect this with their spoken words. So the ultimate purpose of reading and writing abilities is the spoken language skill. So learning both language and literacy in a systematic manner is very important. A language is a natural system of communication that people use to express thoughts, feelings, ideas, and feelings to one another. So literacy is commonly defined as the ability to read and write, as we said before. Language and literacy are mutually dependent in nature and change over time. So according to Roscoe's, Christie, and Richgill's 2003, young children require writing to assist in learning about reading, and reading to assist in learning about writing, and oral language to assist in learning about both. So as you can see, oral language is highly important for the process of reading and writing. So here we have to be helping children excel and do better in literacy. So the goal of providing a systematic vocabulary instruction to students in the classroom and incorporating new words into classroom activities is to help children improve or enhance their literacy skills. In turns, these methods will assist children in learning to read and write more effectively, as well as improving their academic performance. Now we come to talk about language and literacy in early childhood education. So language is the ability to understand and use words to communicate. It is the system of communication that consists of a set of symbols and rules that are used to convey a meaning. Literacy is the ability to read and write. It is the ability to use language to communicate. Early childhood education actually is the provision of care or education for children from birth to age 8. It is the foundation upon which children's future learning is built. Early childhood education programs provide opportunities for children to develop language and literacy skills through a variety of activities, such as singing, storytelling, and playing games. Here we come to talk about language, linguistics, and literacy. Language and writing are not the same, although people now confuse them. And the former is far older than the later. Human spoken language developed late in the Paleolithic, probably 100,000 or 120,000 years ago. Whereas through writing, the representation of language, element by element, in a permanent medium was not invented until 5,200 years ago. Now we're going to talk about language. So our current estimate of when language itself evolved is based on skeletal evidence for a swift evolutionary push toward the modern human vocal tract during the Upper Paleolithic. These changes away from the throat, tongue, and mouth configuration, typical of other primates, made rapid spoken speech possible while making it easier to die of obstructed air passages such as choking. Such difficulties for the individual must have been well offset for the species by the survival benefits of rapid, voluntary, and abstract communication, one of the humankind's most powerful ideas. Indeed, language's most important design characteristics are that it is, first of all, voluntary. Unlike the core systems of other primates, Speech is initiated from the voluntary part of the motor cortex. It is arbitrary. We can talk even about things that do not exist, allowing us to solve hypothetical problems, and from abstractions, language is not tied to immediate reality. It is productive. We can use already known vocabulary and syntactic patterns to generate an infinite supply of new messages, not to mention for sure new vocabulary and patterns. Largely linear, here we mean that messages unfold rapidly through time, a choice that places major constraints on the details of language design. And it is a two-way. Individuals can both produce and understand messages. So as a result of being arbitrary, languages must be learned. Only the propensity to learn language is instinctive, not the individual languages themselves. Hence, babies must have a long period of apprenticeship to learn to communicate linguistically, a fact equally true of spoken tongues and visual languages like American Sign Language ASL, which has all the structural feature and design complexities of spoken language, only in a different and equally evanescent form. Research shows that children deprived of early exposure to linguistic communication, which happens sometimes with deaf babies, do not develop the neurological structures in the brain necessary for handling the complexities of language later. Because languages are arbitrary, they change constantly, adapting easily to the changing world of things to talk about and social messages to send. As a result of this constant change, speakers of a single language who move away from each other will change their systems differently, a process that may continue until we perceive them as speaking different dialects or even after many centuries, different languages. This process is called language divergence and leads to what linguistics call language families. So the members of a language family are simply changed later forms of what was once language. For example, the speakers of Latin fanned out across the Roman Empire 6,000 years ago, but after the breakup of the empire, when travel became dangerously difficult, the local versions of late Latin began to diverge, producing the so-called Romance language family, consisting notably of Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian, along with several other dialects and languages. Less well known because they have fewer speakers, but Latin itself was a changed later form of yet older languages, going back to something we call Proto-Italic for lacking of knowing what its speakers called it, and even further back to one we call Proto-Indo-European. Now we're going to talk about linguistics. So modern linguistics, which is the scientific study of language in all its aspects, began in the 18th and 19th centuries with the investigation of just such historical questions. The 2,500 years of continuous written records of Latin and Romance languages provided one useful laboratory in which language change could be observed. The brothers Grimm, Jacob Grimm and William Grimm, in recording verbatim their famous collection of German folk tales, accidentally created another linguistic data set in which they kept noticing interesting relations among the Germanic dialects of the crowns who recounted the tales. Elsewhere, other scholars were noting the more distant relationships among Greek, Latin, Sanskrit, and other languages we now recognize as Indo-European. Eventually, linguists realized that the relationship between languages within a family were in certain ways regular, if complex, especially in how their sounds changed. This fact allowed scholars to begin to reconstruct forms of the ancestor languages, even when those forms were not attested in writing. To facilitate this linguistic reconstruction, they needed to study the structural properties of each language, since before they could compare thoroughly, they had to know in detail what they were comparing. In this way, the systematic study of synchronic as opposed to historical features of language was added to the field of linguistics around 1,900 years ago. So the most basic components of the spoken language, all needing study, are the speech sounds themselves, which we call phonetics, the system of using certain sounds to tell words apart in a given language, traditionally called phonemics, although other approaches to sound contrasts are sometimes used, the forms of words morphology, the structures by which words are combined into phrases and sentences, syntax, and the meaning components, we call it semantics. So in the mid-20th century, linguists began to explore beyond the sentence level to analyze the structure of discourse, poetry, formulaic speech, and other large units. So 19th century European scholars were not the first people, of course, to inquire about language history or structure. For example, around the 5th or 4th century, before Christ, the Indian scholar Panini compiled a thorough grammar of Sanskrit, including what amounts to an excellent structural analysis of its sounds. But it is their work on which modern linguistic science is principally based. They, in turn, were contemporarily spurred on by the masses of inscriptions that archaeologists were turning up, many in unknown and unreadable scripts. Now we come to the last idea, which was writing. So the most important scripts disappeared in the 19th century were Mesopotamian cuneiform and Egyptian hieroglyphics. Their importance came from the fact that they belonged to the two oldest traditions of true writing, representation of connected linguistic structures rather than only single concepts or situations. So cuneiform required more of a team effort, in part because it turned out to be more than one script and because even the mainstream version had serviced several languages over nearly 3,000 years and had evolved considerably in form during that time. So cuneiform means wedge-shaped and refers to a whole family of scripts written by impressing wedge-shaped marks into clay with a stylus. The first breakthroughs occurred in the 1840s, but scholars gradually disentangled the various scripts and languages. From later to earlier, although some like Elamite remain undeciphered because we do not know enough about the language family represented, most of the languages wherein cuneiform belonged to Semitic language family, although at last one, Hittite, was Indo-European and several belonged to still other families. So in fact, the very first language written in a cuneiform was not Semitic, it was Sumerian, a language that we still cannot relate conclusively to any other language or family. Sumerian cuneiform writing first appeared in the early cities of Mesopotamia, Iraq, late in the 4th millennium before Christ. So next time we're going to talk about the origin of writing. Thank you for listening. See you later.